Hot asphalt hissed under my boots as an HOA crew rolled black pavement over my private gravel road. Their orange cones blocked my only way out. Their backhoe had already ripped my fence posts from the dirt, and the fresh tar was running straight toward the subdivision entrance like they were claiming my driveway for the whole neighborhood. A white BMW idled beside the mess. Vivian Ashworth, HOA president, stood with a clipboard and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Community upgrade," she said, while a truck painted double yellow lines across land I paid $80,000 to keep private. What she didn't know was simple. I owned the access road, the gate easement, and the towing contract tied to every vehicle that crossed it without permission. Then the foreman handed me a bill for $3,200. The paper was still warm from the printer. Diesel smoke curled around his hard hat. Somewhere behind me, a security guard started waving residents through my road like it was a public street. That was the first sign this wasn't just vandalism. This was organized. I looked past the machines and saw stone entrance columns being unloaded from a flatbed. Brass plaques caught the morning sun. Willowbrook Commons Grand Entrance. My driveway had a new name before I even finished my coffee. I didn't yell. I didn't shove anyone. I stood there with grit under my tongue and watched Vivian point at my land like she had discovered it. "You'll thank us when property values rise," she said. Her perfume rode over the hot asphalt, sweet and chemical. Behind her, two teenagers on skateboards rolled down the fresh pavement toward my house. Their wheels clicked over the seams. That sound hit harder than the machinery. This road led to my front porch, my wife's garden, my daughter's bedroom window. It was not a shortcut. It was not a community amenity. It was mine. My name is Garrett Rockwell. I spent 30 years in commercial construction, pouring roads, reading plats, and watching developers try every dirty trick in the book. That was why I bought this 3-acre place outside Austin. Peace. Distance. Gravel under tires instead of politics under my skin. The old rancher who sold it to me had carved out the road as a separate parcel in 1987. I paid extra for that line on the deed. I remembered signing it. I remembered the notary's blue stamp. Vivian remembered none of that, because people like her never read what they don't expect to fear. She only saw a strip of land between her subdivision and the county road. She saw traffic flow. She saw curb appeal. She saw another lever. By noon, the crew had thrown my survey markers into a ditch. By 2, they had mounted the first brass plaque. By 4, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox demanding monthly maintenance fees for the road they had stolen that morning. My wife Elena read it once, then set it on the kitchen table without a word. The silence felt heavier than shouting. Outside, headlights kept sweeping across our windows as neighbors tested their shiny new entrance. Every car that passed was another fingerprint. Every tire mark was another trespass. And by sunset, Vivian had made one more mistake. Part 2 draft. The next morning, the smell of wet asphalt still hung over the property like a stubborn fog. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the road outside my kitchen window. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee gone cold in my hand and counted 23 vehicles using my driveway before 8 o'clock. Every passing engine sent a low vibration through the ground. Every headlight sweep felt like a reminder that somebody had decided my property belonged to everyone except me. Then I noticed something new. A uniformed security guard sat in a golf cart near the entrance columns. He was stopping vehicles, waving some through, turning others around, acting like he controlled access to land he had probably never heard of a week earlier. The crunch of gravel was gone now. In its place came the constant hum of traffic. It sounded wrong. Elena heard it too. She stood beside me, arms crossed against the morning chill. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Sometimes silence says more than anger ever could. Around noon, I drove down to the entrance. The fresh pavement gleamed under the Texas sun. The brass plaque reflected light like a trophy. Willowbrook Commons Grand Entrance. The word sat on my land as confidently as if they had been there for decades. The security guard stepped forward when I parked. He looked nervous. Young guy, maybe 25, probably hired 2 days ago and thrown into a situation he did not understand. "Sir, residents only beyond this point," he said. "Residents only." I stared at him for a moment. Then I pointed toward the house visible at the far end of the road. "That is my house." His face drained of color. Behind him, a white SUV rolled through without stopping. Another followed. Then another. Somebody had already trained him to treat me like the outsider. That was when I realized how fast Vivian was moving. This was not improvisation. This was a plan. By late afternoon, more certified letters arrived. One demanded monthly maintenance fees. Another warned of future assessments tied to roadway improvements. The third claimed the entrance corridor now served a community function and required compliance with neighborhood standards. I spread the papers across my dining table. The stack smelled like fresh toner and bad decisions. Elena read each page carefully. Then she slid one document toward me. Look at the date. I did. The approval signature was dated 3 days before construction even started. My fingers stopped moving. Outside, another stream of vehicles rolled past the windows. The timing was impossible. Somebody had approved everything before the first machine ever touched the ground. Suddenly, this looked a lot less like HOA arrogance and a lot more like something coordinated. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the traffic. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of the rancher who owned the property next to mine. His voice sounded tight. "Garrett," he said, "you need to come see what they did on my side of the fence." The smell of fresh asphalt hit me before I even opened the door. Overnight, the HOA paved straight through my private road, ripped out my survey markers, and sent me a bill for $3,200 like they owned the place. Their president stood there smiling, calling it a community upgrade. I said nothing. Not when they installed stone entrance signs. Not when they posted security guards on my driveway. Not even when they started fining me for using my own land. Because buried in a deed signed decades ago was one line they never bothered to read. And the moment my attorney slid that document across the table, every smile in that room disappeared. Then someone from the county walked in carrying a bright orange folder. I drove straight to Walter Jenkins's ranch with the county survey maps riding shotgun beside me. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, but the look on Walter's face told a different story. Fresh stakes had appeared along his fence line. Bright orange ribbons fluttered in the wind. Survey paint marked the grass every 20 feet. Somebody had been busy. Walter kicked at one of the stakes with his boot. "They showed up yesterday," he said. "Claimed they were planning future improvements." Future improvements. The phrase sounded familiar. Too familiar. The smell of cut cedar drifted from a nearby brush pile while we followed the markers across his property. They pointed straight toward the same road Vivian had taken over. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. This was bigger than my driveway. Much bigger. Back home, I spread aerial maps across my dining table. Elena helped line up property records while the ceiling fan hummed overhead. One parcel connected to another, then another. The proposed route stretched across multiple private properties before feeding directly into Willowbrook Commons. My road was only the first piece. They were building a network, a shortcut, a permanent expansion, and they were doing it without securing ownership first. That realization settled heavily in the room. Outside, headlights continued flowing past our windows. The traffic had actually increased. Around 9 that evening, my phone buzzed again. Marcus Webb, a retired Marine who lived inside the subdivision, sounded irritated. "You need to hear this," he said. 10 minutes later, he sent me an audio recording from an HOA board meeting. The sound quality was rough. Folding chairs scraped against tile floors. People coughed. Papers shuffled. Then Vivian's voice cut through the room. Calm, confident, certain. She spoke about future access. Corridors. She spoke about regional growth. She spoke about controlling transportation flow into surrounding properties. Then she made a mistake. She referred to my road as a completed acquisition. I replayed that sentence 3 times. Completed acquisition. The words hung in the air. Nobody acquires private property through a construction crew and a clipboard. Elena looked up from the maps. She thinks this is already finished. I thought the same thing. The next morning brought another surprise. County inspectors arrived at the entrance columns. 2 trucks. 3 officials. Clipboards in hand. Residents slowed down to watch. The inspectors measured distances. Took photographs. Examined drainage areas. Vivian appeared within minutes. Her white BMW rolled up so quickly that gravel sprayed behind her tires. She smiled the moment she stepped out. The kind of smile people wear when they believe they already won. The inspection lasted nearly an hour. Then everyone left. No citations. No warnings. Nothing. Vivian's confidence grew instantly. By lunchtime, she had workers installing decorative landscaping along the entrance. Expensive stone borders. Imported shrubs. Fresh irrigation lines. Every improvement pushed deeper onto property she did not own. Every dollar spent made her more committed. That was when I stopped feeling frustrated. Frustration had limits. This had moved beyond that. Now I wanted answers. Real answers. Because somebody was funding this operation. Somebody was approving these plans. And somebody was betting a fortune that nobody would challenge them. That afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from the title company. Inside was the document I had been waiting for. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Thick paper, corporate letterhead. The faint smell of printer toner still clung to the pages. I stood at the kitchen counter while Elena poured coffee and watched me read. The title company had finally completed the chain of title review I requested 3 days earlier. At first, nothing jumped out. Parcel numbers, easement descriptions, legal language dense enough to stop most people after the first page. Then I found it. A recorded access. Restriction filed in 1987 by George Blackwood, the same rancher who originally separated my road from the surrounding subdivision land. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time. The restriction was crystal clear. No shared public access. No conversion into a community roadway. No transfer of use rights without written approval from the road owner. My fingers tightened around the paper. Outside, traffic continued flowing past my windows. Every vehicle crossing that pavement was doing exactly what the restriction prohibited. Elena saw the look on my face immediately. You found something. I handed her the page. She read silently. Then she smiled for the first time in days. Not a big smile. Just enough. Across town, Vivian was still acting like the project was complete. New landscaping crews arrived that afternoon. Decorative lighting appeared near the entrance columns. Residents posted photos online celebrating what they called a neighborhood improvement. Some even thanked the HOA for increasing property values. They had no idea what was sitting inside the envelope on my kitchen table. That evening, I drove to the county records office. The building smelled like old paper and floor wax. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I spent 3 hours reviewing filings connected to the subdivision expansion plans. Most were routine. Then another inconsistency surfaced. The development proposal referenced future traffic capacity that depended on permanent access through multiple private parcels. Mine was listed first. Walter's property appeared second. 2 additional ranches appeared farther down the route. Every projection assumed the access already existed. Nobody had obtained the rights. Yet the paperwork treated them as guaranteed. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Somebody had built an entire growth strategy around property they did not control. That discovery changed everything. Until then, I thought Vivian was acting out of arrogance. Now it looked like pressure. Somebody expected results. Somebody wanted this road operating immediately. The next morning, a black luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. The engine went silent. The driver stepped out carrying a leather folder, expensive suit, expensive watch, the kind of person who normally lets other people deliver bad news. He introduced himself as a representative for a regional development group. His smile never reached his eyes. He offered to purchase the road. Cash. Immediate closing. No negotiations. The numbers sounded impressive. Most people would have accepted before he finished speaking. I declined before he finished his second sentence. His expression barely changed. That told me more than any threat ever could. He had expected resistance. Before leaving, he glanced toward the entrance columns and spoke carefully. A lot of people are depending on this project moving forward. Then he drove away. I stood there listening to the fading engine. Behind the polished language was a simple truth. Too many people had already committed themselves to something they never legally owned. And the next document I uncovered made that problem much worse. The document arrived just before sunrise. I found it wedged inside a stack of records waiting at the county clerk's office. The paper felt brittle, older than everything else connected to the project. I carried it back to my truck and read the first page while rain tapped softly against the windshield. Halfway through the second paragraph, I stopped. Then I read it again. The development group had not simply planned around my road. They had used it as the foundation for everything. Traffic studies, expansion forecasts, future lot sales, utility projections, emergency access routes. Every major projection depended on permanent use of property they did not legally control. The realization settled over me slowly. If access disappeared, the entire model collapsed. I drove home with the windshield wipers sweeping steadily across the glass. The rhythmic sound matched the thoughts turning in my head. By the time I reached the house, Elena already knew something had changed. She looked up from the kitchen table. "You found it." I nodded. Then I spread the documents across the wood surface. Maps covered one side. Financial projections covered the other. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars in future value depended on assumptions that existed only on paper. No wonder the man in the luxury SUV had looked nervous when I refused his offer. This was never about buying a road. It was about protecting an investment already built on top of it. Later that afternoon, Walter arrived carrying a cardboard box filled with old correspondence. The smell of dust and aged paper filled the room as we sorted through everything. Most of it was routine. Property notices, survey requests, utility discussions. Then Walter found a letter dated nearly 2 years earlier. A regional planner had requested preliminary access discussions with neighboring landowners. Walter never responded because nobody followed up. Neither did the other ranch owners. Yet somehow the project moved forward anyway. They skipped the hard part. They skipped obtaining permission. They simply acted as if approval would eventually appear. That confidence fascinated me. Somebody believed private ownership would not matter in the end. Outside, the steady stream of vehicles continued using the entrance. Every passing headlight reflected across the kitchen windows. Every engine reminded me how deeply the assumption had already taken root. Residents believed the road belonged to them now. The HOA believed it. The developers believed it. The only problem was reality. 3 days later, I attended a public planning session at the county administration building. The room smelled like coffee and fresh carpet. Representatives from the development group presented colorful renderings of future improvements. Expanded traffic flow, improved access, higher property values. They spoke confidently, too confidently. Then one slide appeared on the screen behind them. A transportation map. My road sat right in the center, highlighted in bright blue, labeled as a primary corridor. Several people in the audience nodded approvingly. I looked around the room and realized most had never questioned the ownership issue. Why would they? The presentation treated it as settled fact. The presenter moved to the next slide. But I had already taken a photograph. As the meeting ended, a county employee quietly approached me in the parking lot. He glanced around. Before speaking, his voice stayed low. "If you think those maps are interesting, wait until you see the permit application they submitted last month." The county employee was waiting beside his pickup truck when I arrived the next morning. The parking lot was nearly empty. A warm breeze pushed dust across the pavement. He opened a folder and handed me a copy of the permit application. The pages smelled like fresh ink. I scanned the first section quickly. Utility routing, traffic modifications, drainage adjustments. Then I reached the attached access map. My eyes stopped moving. The application identified my road as an existing community corridor. Not proposed, not pending, existing. Somebody had officially represented private property as infrastructure they already controlled. The employee shook his head. "That is why I called you." I folded the pages carefully and slipped them into my truck. During the drive home, the tires hummed against the highway. Every mile made the picture clearer. Vivian had never been operating alone. The development group had already integrated the road into future planning. The HOA had already marketed the improvements to residents. Contractors were already building around assumptions that existed only because nobody challenged them. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not argue, not threaten, document everything. Elena was sitting on the porch when I arrived. The evening sun reflected off the new entrance columns in the distance. They looked permanent. That was the trap. People trust things that look permanent. I spread the permit application across the outdoor table. Elena read every page. Halfway through, she looked up slowly. "They filed this after you rejected the purchase offer." She was right. The dates matched perfectly. They had accelerated instead of backing away. That told me something important. They were running out of time. The next several days became a blur of records requests, photographs, and site visits. Walter joined me. So did the owners of the 2 other ranches shown on the expansion maps. None of them had granted access rights. None had signed agreements. Yet every planning document treated their participation as inevitable. The more evidence we gathered, the more confident I became. Then came the moment that changed everything. Marcus called late Friday afternoon. I could hear voices in the background. Cars passing. A microphone squealing somewhere nearby. "You need to get down here," he said. They are holding a community presentation. 20 minutes later, I walked into the clubhouse. The room was packed. Homeowners filled every chair. Colorful boards lined the walls. Future growth projections. New entrances. Expanded transportation routes. A consultant stood near the front explaining long-term improvements. Then he pointed at a giant display map. My road sat directly in the center, highlighted in bold blue. Applause filled the room. People smiled. Some took pictures. Others discussed future property values. The consultant continued speaking. He described the corridor as secure, guaranteed, fully integrated into future development. I stood quietly near the back and listened. Nobody in that room knew the actual ownership status. Nobody knew about the restrictions. Nobody knew about the permit language. They were celebrating something that legally did not exist. As the meeting ended, Vivian noticed me for the first time. Her smile appeared instantly. Confident, relaxed, certain. The expression stayed there until she saw the thick folder tucked beneath my arm. Then something flickered across her face. Just for a second. And in that moment, I realized she had finally started to worry. Monday morning arrived with a low ceiling of gray clouds and the smell of rain hanging in the air. I spent the entire day assembling evidence. Maps, photographs, recorded filings, survey records, permit applications. Every page told the same story. Assumptions had been treated like ownership. By sunset, the dining table had disappeared beneath stacks of documents. Elena walked around them carrying coffee refills like supplies to a command post. The house felt quieter than usual. Even the traffic outside seemed different now. Not annoying. Useful. Every vehicle crossing the pavement added another example of unauthorized use. Every passing headlight strengthened the timeline. 3 days later, our attorney filed formal notices to every major party involved. The development group received one. The HOA received another. County offices received copies. So did the neighboring landowners whose properties appeared on future expansion maps. Then we waited. The first response arrived faster than expected. Contractors stopped installing new landscaping. Equipment disappeared from the entrance area. Work crews that had been active every day suddenly vanished. The silence was impossible to miss. Residents started asking questions. Social media groups filled with speculation. Nobody seemed to know why progress had stalled. Vivian tried to project confidence. She posted cheerful updates. She talked about temporary delays and routine reviews. But the energy had changed. Even through a screen, it was obvious. She no longer sounded certain. Then the county scheduled a formal review meeting. The conference room was packed. Developers sat on one side. HOA representatives sat on the other. Several property owners attended in person. I carried the same folder Vivian had noticed at the clubhouse. It felt heavier now, not because of the paper, because of what it represented. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Experts reviewed maps. Officials reviewed filings. Questions became harder. Answers became shorter. At one point, a transportation consultant admitted that several projections assumed permanent access through properties that had never granted authorization. The room went completely silent. I still remember the hum of the air conditioning, the faint scratching of somebody taking notes. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. The statement spoke for itself. Then came the permit application, the same one identifying my road as an existing community corridor. Copies were distributed across the table. Several officials read the language twice. One exchanged a long look with another. Vivian shifted in her chair. The development representatives stopped smiling. For the first time since this started, the momentum changed direction. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough. The kind of shift you feel before everyone else notices it. By the end of the meeting, further approvals were suspended pending review. Expansion discussions paused. Additional filings were requested. The entire project entered uncertainty. Outside the building, storm clouds gathered over the horizon. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. Reporters began calling for comments. Residents demanded explanations. Investors wanted updates. Everybody suddenly wanted answers to questions they should have asked months earlier. I stood beside my truck and watched people leave the parking lot one by one. Across the lot, Vivian climbed into her BMW without looking in my direction. The confidence that once followed her everywhere seemed gone. But the biggest surprise arrived an hour later when our attorney called. Somebody had just submitted an emergency proposal behind closed doors. The emergency proposal landed on my desk the following morning. Rain tapped against the windows while I read through the filing. The development group was asking for temporary access authorization while ownership questions remained unresolved. Temporary. The word appeared 17 times in 14 pages. It sounded harmless. It was not. If approved, it would give them exactly what they needed most. Time. More construction. More investment. More residents, depending on a situation that had never been legally secured. By then, however, the atmosphere had completely changed. County officials were reviewing every assumption. Investors were asking harder questions. Even residents inside the subdivision had started requesting answers. The confidence that once drove the project forward was gone. A week later, the final review hearing arrived. The courthouse annex smelled like coffee, wet jackets, and old paper. Every seat was occupied. Property owners filled one side of the room. HOA members filled the other. Reporters sat near the back with notebooks open. Outside, the sky remained gray. Inside, nobody seemed interested in small talk anymore. The hearing lasted most of the day. Documents moved across tables. Maps appeared on large screens. Survey records were compared against permit filings. Every major assumption behind the expansion was examined piece by piece. The turning point came shortly after lunch. One county official displayed the original access restriction from 1987. The same document that had been sitting in my folder since the beginning. The language was simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. The room grew quiet as the restriction was read into the record. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged it. There was nothing to challenge. Then came the transportation maps. Then the permit applications. Then the development projections built around access rights that never existed. The pattern became impossible to ignore. What looked like a completed project from the outside had actually been a chain of assumptions stacked on top of one another. Once the foundation was questioned, everything above it started to wobble. By late afternoon, the decision arrived. Future expansion approvals were denied pending lawful property agreements. Existing filings required correction. Several applications were withdrawn before additional review could occur. The emergency proposal failed. Just like that, the momentum stopped. Not because of an argument. Not because of a dramatic speech. Because ownership still mattered. Facts still mattered. Paperwork still mattered. Outside the building, people stood in small groups discussing what happened. Reporters chased comments. Residents looked confused. Some looked frustrated. Others looked relieved. Across the parking lot, workers were already removing temporary project signage from their trucks. They moved quietly. The energy felt completely different from the confidence I had seen weeks earlier. That evening, I drove home along the same stretch of pavement that started everything. The entrance columns still stood. The decorative lights still glowed. Traffic moved more slowly now. The road itself looked unchanged. But appearances can be deceptive. Elena was waiting on the porch when I pulled in. The smell of fresh rain drifted across the property. Somewhere beyond the trees, thunder rolled softly across the Texas hills. We sat together and watched the evening settle in. For the first time in weeks, no new letters arrived. No new construction appeared. No new demands showed up in the mailbox. Just silence. Honest silence. The kind that returns when people finally run out of shortcuts. And as the last headlights disappeared down the road, I realized something simple. Justice is never loud. It is patient,